Hey, Trick Class, I want to go over this homework problem. Number one, to show you how to use the graphing feature, but number two, just to kind of walk you through an example here. So we want at least 2 cycles of this, but the key thing is when you are given these sines and cosine functions to know what to do with those quarter period points. So if I am working with a cosine function in general, there's the y-axis, there's the x-axis. Cosine starts at its max and does its wave like that. So what typically we do is come up with the amplitude, the phase shift, all those different things beforehand, and determine what I like to start with is where are those first and last points in the period going to be. They're typically at 0, and then right here when we return is at 2 pi, right? But that is if there's nothing happening inside a cosine, if it's just x, and there is something happening in here. So what I do is I take that thing that's inside the parentheses, the 1/4 x, and I set that equal to the starting point, and I set that equal to the ending point of the period. All right, and then solving these two equations, 1/4 x equals 0, well, multiply both sides by 4 to get rid of the fraction, and you get x equals 0. So the initial point is still going to stay at 0, so that's still good. But this other point, multiplying both sides by 4, instead of 2 pi, I'm now going to get 8 pi. And so this new right end of one wave of the cosine function is now being shifted way over to the right. So instead of doing that, I'm just going to change this to 8 pi. And basically what we've done is we've stretched out this sine wave to make it take a lot longer for it to make one cycle. All right, now the same thing that's happened before still holds true. We got at 4 pi. We hit our minimum, and then at halfway between 0 and 4 pi, which would be 2 pi, we'll hit there on the x-axis, and then halfway between 4 and 8 pi, which would be 6 pi, we'll hit the x-axis again. So there's where those 4 quarter period points will be. This maximum that happens here and here, those heights are at 4 and -4. So we have all our 4 key points, and now we can plot our graph. All right, we'll click the thing to enlarge the graph. Up here, it's got, what do you want to start with? Do you want to start with this wave or this wave? And you look at them and maybe think they look the same. But this is a sine wave. This is a cosine wave. And the way, again, I know is that this is starting kind of in the middle and rising. This is the sine wave. And this is the cosine wave, and it's starting at its max and falling. So I'm going to start with that because it's a cosine function. All right, and then we can just click anywhere in the graph. So there's the cosine wave that we have. But the amplitude that we're using here is coming from that number that's out in front, the absolute value of that number, so it's 4. All right, and then the period, like we did in the math just a little bit before, the period, instead of it being 2 pi, we multiplied by 4 to get this just to be x. So that ended up making it 8 pi. So I'm going to change that to an 8. All right, and then the vertical shift and phase shift, those come in if we have addition or subtraction anywhere in the problem. We don't have any of that. So that is going to be our curve. All right, we could potentially have reflections about the x-y axis if there's any negatives in here. So if there was a -4, then we would have a reflection about the x-axis. If this was -1/4, then we would have a reflection about the y-axis, but cosine is even, so a reflection about the y-axis wouldn't be any different than this, what we have now. All right, so I'm going to click Save, and I'm going to check my answer. And then it's going to ask me a little bit about the domain and the range, okay? So the domain of the function, it's what can go in for x, and you can see with this sine wave, the x-axis right here, it's just going to keep on going forever. This wave will never end. So that's -infinity to +infinity. So a parentheses, negative, infinity symbol, comma, will close. So there's my domain. But the range is limited because, again, you look at the y-axis and look left and right. You see that there's these places that don't have any graph. So this is limited to between -4 and +4. Those are included, so we do need brackets, the square brackets for this. So that's -4 to 4. Close it with a square bracket as well.